I want to welcome some special people here this morning. We have subjects from my documentary, Traces Voices of the Second Generation. We have Sophia Pentel, who just stood up to take a call. Shoshana Hess, and we also have Sam Rogozinski. Thank you so much. Thank you for all you do for advocating for the second gen. Why? Why do people hate Jewish people? Rebecca and I ask ourselves these questions. We ask ourselves these questions every day. Since Bondi Beach, since October 7th, since the Second World War, since before pogroms, after pogroms, since 1492, since opening my second grade spelling book and seeing swastikas frighten my 8-year-old gaze. Yet, through it all, we're still here with this history, with the present state of skyrocketing anti-Semitism, and still asking, why does humankind carry this malignancy through time? I pose this question to my friend Rebecca, my brilliant academic friend, Dr. Rebecca Jefferson, as the rabbi said, is curator of my happiest place on earth, the Price Library of Judaica at the University of Florida. If you've not been to this magnificent hallowed space pictured on the right, Price Library, Rebecca and I invite you to attend a wonderful event there on March 29th from 2 to 4 p.m. entitled Animating Hope, the Itzhak and Bertie Cohen Puppet Theater. Jacksonville is home to second-gen Tommy and Yvonne Cohen, whose parents' remarkable story of survival include their amazing handmade puppets created while in hiding, which provided rays of joy to children during the war. Today, the puppets finally find their home at the Price Library and are the subject of my upcoming documentary, Hope in Hiding. I hope you'll have the opportunity to hear from the Cohen family when you're there, view the puppets, we'll do a little disco thing maybe, and learn more about this inspiring story. Nowhere else but here at the temple and in our Wild West world of social media and AI, everyone now narrates their own story and they curate their own news, information, and knowledge. This creative storytelling maelstrom has capitulated the roles of scholars like Rebecca. She's now a heroic guardian of libraries who protect knowledge and history from the slow or not so slow creep of revisionism, distortion, erasure, and propaganda. I don't know if this is what you signed up for, my dear friend, but here we are. So for the next hour or so, Rebecca and I will take you on a historical journey. I want you to think of me as your bus driver and Rebecca as our most excellent guide. We'll begin in antiquity with the hatred towards Jews in the Middle East. And from there, it mutated, spreading to Rome and Europe. We'll make our way to our own shore as colonists with hatred packed in our immigration baggage. Since then, hatred toward Jews was fostered by Russian propaganda and metastasized in the dangerous far left and far right. Rebecca will define modern anti-Semitism, address the word anti-Semitism, and the how and why of its persistence. And through it all, we have been witness, we have succumbed, and we have survived. And I want you to remember that. Once we've completed this condensed timeline, you will feel like you've taken on an intense college-level crash course. And we know it is a lot to take in. You'll have important questions, and you can only imagine what we had to leave out. Time permitting, we'll address those during a Q&A. But remember this, unlike college, you will not have a final exam. However, I do have a challenge for you, so stay tuned. Buckle up, hydrate, and always remember the undeniable resiliency of Jewish identity can better be understood if we have knowledge of our long history, and in this case, of anti-Semitism in particular. So our timeline begins in antiquity. Rebecca, indeed, before the Common Era, there was hatred towards Jews, which was new to me when we started this project. Could you explain?
That's right. Thank you, Stacey, and thank you for having us here today. It's an important program, I think. We're all familiar with anti-Semitism. Perhaps when we think of the word anti-Semitism, we automatically probably go to the Holocaust as the ultimate expression of it. We know, you perhaps heard about 1492, some of the big historic moments, the expulsion from Spain, pogroms in Russia. So there are outstanding moments in Jewish history, but anti-Semitism has much longer roots. And it starts with anti-Jewish sentiment that really begins way back in antiquity, before even the birth of Christianity. And here on the slide you can see the Roman Arch of Titus, depicting the Romans taking the spoils of the Second Temple when it's destroyed. And that's really just illustrative of what is being thought about the Jews in this period. And one of the most influential texts, and I have to say this is not exactly a history program, it's more of a journey through anti-Semitic texts, words, ideas. So
because that's your expertise, that's your lens.
That's my lens. I'm not a historian of anti-Semitism. I'm a curator of anti-Semitic literature, and through that I've built up my expertise. So we're dealing in one of the first most influential texts in this period is by the Egyptian historian Manetho, who starts to talk about Jews as outsiders, and comes up with reasons why he believes they were expelled from Egypt. We also have the Roman historian Tacitus, who describes Jews as misanthropes. That means haters of humanity. So already these seeds are sown in antiquity. Jews are the outsiders, Jews are different. How does this manifest itself? With each slide you'll see an influential text, what some of the core things that those texts are bringing out, and then you'll see often I've put down a result. What was the result? We have the first ever pogrom in 53 CE in Alexandria, where Jews are murdered, thanks to these ideas that are starting to circulate. So really the birth of the idea of adverso Judaeus against the Jews, this tradition is born between 100 and 200 CE with the birth of Christianity. And one of the most influential texts of the period is by Justin Martyr, who writes Trypho the Jew. And in his work, he's starting to talk about how the church has superseded Judaism. The church is now seeing itself as the true inheritor of Israel. They are the true Israel, and they have superseded Judaism. Another idea that he posits is deicide. This is the first time that Jews are accused of killing Christ. And this is coming up in some of the early works of Christianity. And why? Because at this point, even though Christianity emerges out of Judaism, at this point they're trying to separate themselves. And as part of this separation, they're pointing the finger at Jews as being guilty of killing Christ. So in early Christian literature, this anti-Jewish rhetoric, it grows. Why? Because by the time we get to the 300s and 400s, the Christians are very much trying to get Rome on board. And so how do they do that? They present Christianity as, what they're trying to do is point the fingers at Jews of being guilty of killing Christ, and they downplay the role of Pontius Pilate, the Roman, and they upplay the role of the Jews in this. One of the leading figures in this period is John Chrysostom. He's an Alexandrian archbishop, and this is a period in Alexandria where there's a lot of community overlap. There's a lot of social interaction. Non-Jews, pagans, are going to Jewish services. But what happens here is Chrysostom sees the threat in that, and what he tries to do is cause a separation. And so he starts accusing Jews of being savage, spiritually blind, and cheating and scheming, and only fit for killing. And again, this leads to a lot of community separation and violence. To be noted, Chrysostom is quoted heavily by the Nazis. And sorry, I meant to tell you what the image was. The image, you can see all of these images with these slides are how these ideas then manifest in the Middle Ages, in devotional books, in stained glass windows, in cathedrals. You start to see images of Jews with hooked noses, Jews doing terrible things like leading Jesus off for crucifixion. Here we can see a Jew beating another one. He's got a money bag. So all of these ideas that start percolating we'll see them in art. By the time we get Rome adopts Christianity, and we get the Roman Christian Empire, it then has an effect on the legal status of Jews. Jews are now prevented from engaging in civic society and barred from certain positions. Here we have the full manifestation of supersessionism. But we also have something that arises through St. Augustine of Hippo called the doctrine of witness. St. Augustine, because you would think that by this time it would be just easy to kill off all the Jews. The church has superseded Judaism, so why keep them around? Well, St. Augustine comes up with an idea that it is important to keep Jews around because they are spiritual witnesses to the truth of Christianity. And so he describes them as almost like Cain, that they bear the mark, but they mustn't be killed. And so what happens is you then get the marginalization of Jews in mainstream society as a result. The image that you can see here is very effective. It's called ecclesia and synagoga. And these were all over cathedrals in Europe. I've seen them in my own country. As a young girl, I saw them. Ecclesia is church, and she's presented as a beautiful woman. She's upright, her head is strong and proud. Synagoga is bent over. She's blindfolded. She's spiritually blind. Her mast is broken, and her books of law are falling from her hands. So you can see how this imagery was presented to people going to church every day.
So Rebecca, moving forward, we're going to see a lot of your sources coming from Christian, Catholic, and Protestant texts. This is not a discussion about the damnation of Christianity at all, and that's very important that we get out in front of that. But that's who was printing. That's who had access to the written word. Would that be fair for people like me to understand?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you'll see as we go through the slides, you'll see that it takes certain bad actors with certain political motivations to rouse up the crowds. So it's not all Christians. It's certain Christian actors.
We're familiar with this theme. It's called power.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're entering the medieval medieval time. And what do we find during this period? And I know there's an image on here that we've discussed over the years that harkens directly back to your childhood in Birmingham. So don't forget to share that.
Okay. So when we get to the medieval period, we start to see accusations of usury. There are economic accusations Why? Because in Christian society, Christians are banned from lending on interest. It's seen as spiritually bad. And so lending on interest is something that often is given to outsiders to do. And Jews, as we've seen, are now marginalized. They have no role in civic society. It's very difficult to find certain occupations. So certain numbers of Jews become money lenders. And with this comes the whole baggage of that's associated with money lenders.
Thank you. Oh, no, go ahead now.
I was just going to say, so the slide that you're seeing there is actually an English royal tax document from 1233. And on that document, we see the first ever depiction of the idea of the Jew with a hooked nose. And that's our first anti-Semitic stereotype recorded in art, even though it's not in art, it's on a financial document. So it's not just something that we can look at and say, well, that's medieval. I had an experience myself in my own ninth grade classroom where we were studying the Nazi period, and the teacher thought it would be fun for us all to write some Nazi propaganda. While we were doing this exercise, a child puts up his hand and says, "Sir, were there ever any Jews in the German Nazi army?" And the teacher said, "No, they had too big noses." At which point I stood up and said, "Sir, I'm Jewish and I don't have a big nose." And the room fell silent. But anyway, you can see that it doesn't stay, it evolves. And so this is our first instance of it in the Middle Ages.
And I know that this is a very special slide because it's new to the collection, so please explain.
Yeah, this is one of our new slides. We didn't have this in previous presentations. This is something I've just acquired for the library through a rare book dealer who thought I might be rather interested in it because it's never been studied for its anti-Jewish message. It's called Les 15 Effusions. And that means the 15 effusions, in other words, the pouring out of blood. In this period, there's not only are devotionals thinking about the crucifixion, they're also thinking about the torment of Christ, the passion of Christ before his crucifixion. And the number of torments that they imagine grow. And so they imagine 15 torments. And this particular book is very, very virulently anti-Jewish because it's the Jews who inflict all the torments. And they are described in excruciating detail. Now, this was a booklet that was attached to prayer books. So you would read your prayer book, and then you would read all about the terrible things that Jews inflicted upon Jesus. So it hasn't been studied that way. We now have it in the Price Library of Judaica. We really hope that it'll have attention and be studied.
This is why libraries are so important.
Yes, it's in French. It was a part of a French devotional. Good question. And printed multiple times and disseminated popularly. In this period, in the medieval period, we have several tropes that become embedded in European ideology and culture and that will come through to the Nazi period. What we get with the Fourth Lateran Council of 1233 is a new thing called transubstantiation. And that's where the bread and wine of the Eucharist in Catholic practice is seen now as literally the body and the blood of Christ. So when you're taking in the wafer, you're literally taking in the body of Christ. Along with that then comes an accusation that Jews are trying to steal the host, the wafer, and kill it. And so you get these depictions throughout books printed in this period. This one, so the accusation arises as early as the Fourth Lateran Council in 1233. This is from 1700s, and it's an image of Jews. So you're probably familiar with this one, the blood libel. This starts in the city of Norwich with a little boy who is murdered. His name was William of Norwich. He was an apprentice, a young boy apprentice, and he traded with Jews in the city as well. As soon as he's murdered, an accusation arises that the Jews have murdered him, drained his blood for their matzot. What's happening here is in Norwich, you have a little bit of political tension because you have the Anglo-Saxon population and you have the Norman population. And the Jews are protected by the Normans. They live near to the Norman castle, and there's tensions between the regular Anglo-Saxons and the Normans. And so the Bishop of Norwich decides to play into those tensions by talking up this so-called murder and creating a whole cult around William of Norwich, to the extent that his body is depicted on that church screen that you can see on the bottom there, and around other churches as well. The next blood libel that's very famous is Simon of Trent in Italy, Trenta. He's another child that is murdered tragically, and then the blame is put on the Jewish community. And again, a cult is built around Simon of Trent. 100 miracles are associated to this child, and people are flocking in. And so it's binding people together. And again, it's the local particular clergyman who's playing with this in order to unify where there is sort of tension. And so it doesn't end there. There are hundreds of blood libel accusations across time and across Europe, resulting in mob violence and executions. And the last, we know of blood libels today, but the last blood libel that we know ended in a pogrom was actually in Poland and inflicted on Holocaust survivors. So we'll go to the next one. It gets great, it gets even better, right? The Judensau, I don't know how many of you have heard about this. Judensau is a German word for Jewish pig. And so all of these ideas of Jewish savagery are encapsulated here by this character. And very often it's depicted with a pig and Jews reaching into a rabbi reaching into the bowels of the pig to pull out the Talmud. It's a disgusting image, and it actually, you can see how the lies and distortions are playing here. It's going all against actual Jewish cleanliness laws. It's a real turning truth on its head. The one you can see on the top is in Wittensau in Germany, and the list that you can see down the side there are all the known Judensau sculptures still in existence. I don't know whether you can see, the ones that are in red are the ones that have been removed.
That would be a very good brotherhood project. Next slide.
Churches, Rebecca?
Yes, they're on church. So you'll walk into the church and you'll see it in front of you. So this was a daily image again that would be. Oh, and what I forgot to say was during the Nazi period, children would be taken on school trips to go and see them. Yeah. Then we have the bubonic plague. And of course, who's to blame for that? Who do you think? The Jews. And so Jews, with this rise of this terrible calamity, are accused of poisoning the wells. Individual confessions are extracted under torture. The confessions are disseminated and regarded as truth. And they start to believe that Jews are capable of magic and Satanism, and that's how they're able to poison the wells secretly. Here you can see a woodcut image from a book of a Jewish rabbi putting the poison into the well. And of course it still exists in our language, doesn't it, poisoning the well. This didn't just stop at an idea. It led to riots again and violence again. between, I think I have their dates in the 1300s, you have about 350 anti-Jewish riots, 60 major communities decimated, 150 minor communities decimated. Words had consequences.
It reminds me of COVID when there was an enclave.
Same
I believe
thing.
It was in New York, wasn't
Yes.
it? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, so now we get to my favorite, I thought, period of I still think we're entering the Renaissance. I mean, in 1440, my hero, Johann Gutenberg, created the printing press, which changed everything. Good and not so good. Rebecca?
Right, yeah, so you would think Renaissance, wonderful period, but of course this is when anti-Jewish ideas start to infiltrate sort of popular culture, entertainment, and of course the...
Kind of like social media now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
So and, you know, you're familiar with the two most outstanding examples, Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare. We have Marlowe's The Jew of Malta, we have Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. Now, I love Shakespeare, and one could argue that he's just creating a bad guy, and you've seen the culture he's born into, right? So you know it's easy for him to find a bad guy. But this had obviously a very big knock-on effect, especially with The Merchant of Venice. You know, the idea of the pound of flesh, which is still part of our language. And another phrase, shylocking. Did you know that shylocking was on the Florida law statutes until Charlie Crist removed it in 2009?
Wow.
Right? So it stayed with us. Here we have the main Jewish themes: untrustworthy, unscrupulous, and vengeful. And so this becomes embodied in popular culture and in popular memory, and it doesn't end there, because the two pieces that I show you that are actually from the collection, this one here is by Glanville in the 1700s. He doesn't call it the Merchant of Venice, he calls it the Jew of Venice. And what he does is he has Shakespeare's ghost come onto the stage and blame those stock-jobbing Jews for everything. And then it didn't end there. You can see the one that's on the far end there, the Kingdom of Shylock. This is blaming Jews for World War I and profiteering from World War I. So you can see how, again, words have consequences.
You know, there is always discussion when, you know, actors portray, you know, they put on The Merchant of Venice, and there have been very famous Shylocks.
Yes.
And I think it's important to keep those texts alive because they capture history, but one has to understand the context when they're presented in order to learn, not pure, always just entertainment.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So now the power of print spreads. Jewish ideas. We move to the Enlightenment. Again, a word that, you know, science and philosophy and people becoming enlightened, right? So you'd think that would broaden people's minds. And it did, however.
Yeah, well, I suppose one of the key figures of this period that I'm talking about, the 1500s, we have Martin Luther, the father of the Protestant Reformation. And Martin Luther, after he's pinned his 95 theses to the door of the church, and he's accused the Catholic Church of going against the true religion and offering indulgences for money, absolution from sin if you pay an indulgence. So he's highly critical of that, and he becomes very influential. And at first, he's rather sympathetic to the plight of the Jews and accuses the Catholic Church of its bad treatment of them. He thinks that with his new form of religion, which will be more sympathetic to the Jews, that they'll eventually see that it will be good to convert to Christianity. And so when his big dream is not realized, he turns against the Jews. And in 1543, he publishes his pamphlet. I should stop talking with my hands.
No, it's not your hands. It's just the P's and the B's pop.
On the Jews and their lies. And in this, he recommends setting fire to the synagogues, banning rabbis from preaching. He talks about Jewish houses being razed to the grounds. It's a very, very dangerous text. Jews are defamed as liars and described as a sort of an evil race. This had a knock-on effect. The Berlin synagogue is destroyed. There are widespread expulsions around Germany over the course of the next centuries. And as you can see from the image way over there, The Jews and the Lies is reprinted many, many times. It's influential on the Nazis, heavily influential. They quote from it extensively. Here you can see a publication from Los Angeles in the 1950s, a reprint. As I said, we're in the period of print, and one of a new printing innovation is the printing of what is known in the trade as broadsides, but essentially they're posters. And these were multiple numbers of posters printed. Why? They're easy to produce, they're easy to disseminate, they're massively popular. They're the mass media of their day. And here you can see just a couple of broadsides that capture some of those older ideas about the Judenschau. But here we have not just the Judenschau, but the Judenschau depicted with the body of Simon of Trent. So bringing all these ideas together in one powerful poster that talks against the Jews. What happens after this is that they go back to the old Judenschau sculpture in Wittenberg, which was Martin Luther's town, and they attach to it a new phrase from his book, which corrupts Shem HaMeforash. It corrupts that Hebrew phrase, and
what is
kind
that
of
Hebrew phrase?
Shem HaMeforash,
which means
the great name. It's God's name. It corrupts it and attaches it. It uses Martin Luther's corruption and attaches it to the sculpture. So today, when you go and look at that sculpture, you'll see Martin Luther's corrupted version of that phrase. So they didn't just attack Jews, they attacked Jewish books. We have in our library evidence of that. We have a book from the 16th century that shows evidence of censorship. Jewish books were censored, Jewish books were destroyed. We have the burning of the Talmud in Italy and France in the 1300s and 1400s. By the time we get to the 1700s, we've got a new scientific movement. It's called Christian Hebraism. This was when Christians started to study Hebrew so that they could read Jewish texts in the original languages. Many of these Christian scholars did so for good reasons. They want to understand. And some of them create some foundational works in Hebrew scholarship. Some of them, the bad actors that we mentioned, used them to further distort ideas about Jews, and this is one of them, and he's highly influential. His name was Johann Andreas Eisenmenger. Get this. He studied with rabbis for 19 years under the false idea that he was going to convert to Judaism. He learned rabbinic Hebrew thoroughly, and then he published this book where he takes Talmudic minority opinions out of context, he misquotes, he takes what are complex discussions and makes them into accusations against Jews. This becomes incredibly important for the Nazi period. They quote him extensively. Any bad actor who quotes the Talmud uses his original work. And here you can see an example from the library, Thus Speaks the Talmud, an anti-Semitic piece from the 20th century. So, as Stacey said, we entered the Age of Enlightenment, and following on from the Age of Enlightenment, we get, finally, Jewish emancipation. In the 18th century, we start to see discussions around the Jewish question being the question of civic rights, the question of having citizenship. And slowly, countries in Europe start to give Jews rights. But there's a backlash to this, and particularly in Germany. And we start to see riots starting in Bavaria, across Germany. They start in Bavaria in 1819, and they're called the Hep riots. And Hep, you might recognize today we say hip hip hooray. Hep was the origin. And in the Hep riots, hundreds of Jews are killed. The image that you're seeing there is of a Lutheran chaplain preacher who founded the Christian Social Party. He was much loved across Germany. He was regarded as a second Luther. And here you can see him pinning to the door of the church, reflecting Luther's pinning of the 95 Theses. He's pinning the Hep riots. In other words, it's a call to violence against Jews. Why? Because he's reacting to the modernization in Germany, industrialization, urbanization, and he's pointing the fingers at Jews for where this is not working. And he's calling on local shopkeepers and artisans who are feeling they're feeling the brunt of industrialization. So who's to blame? The Jews. And he writes all of this in that pamphlet just there on the far there. Sorry, next. So now we get to anti-Semitism. Perhaps you know this already, but the word anti-Semitism was born in the late 19th century, and it was, as far as we know, first coined, or at least first extensively used by a man known as Wilhelm Marr, and he writes two influential books. First is called The Victory of the Jews over Germandom. And in this book, he uses the word Semitismus interchangeably with Judentum. So Semite interchangeably with Jew. And so more and more we're seeing Semite being used. Why? Because in this period we have, it's another sort of scientific breakthrough in that we have more and more of the study of languages, more understanding of the historic roots of languages. We're understanding in this period more about where Hebrew and Arabic and Aramaic and all of those languages are interrelated, and these scholars come up with the term Semitic to describe these related languages. That then gets taken out of context and used erroneously to describe a race. So it's now the idea is that there is a Semitic race, and essentially that Semitic race becomes interchanged with Jews. So Jews become the Semites. So in this first book, he's saying Semites as Jews, and he's talking about how they have a victory over Germany. In his second book, published just a year later, he first uses the term Antisemitismus, meaning to be against the Jews. It was him, an anti-Semite, who coined the phrase anti-Semitism. And for him, and for all the anti-Semites that then joined him as part of his anti-Semitic party, anti-Semitism was a badge of honor.
And we have a problem that we find that word problematic, but we can speak about that now or later, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, perhaps we'll keep going.
Okay. Okay. Now we have the conspiracy theories.
So one of the main tropes of anti-Semitism is the conspiracy theory. Anti-Semitism quickly embraces the conspiracy theory of Jewish world domination, primarily through this text here that emerges in 1903, which is later proved to be a forgery. It was created by the Russian secret police, and it discusses how Jewish elders across time meet every 100 years to formulate a plan to dominate the world out of Zion. Okay, and this is quite quickly shown to be a forgery, a fake. Yet it takes off. And it's translated into 80 languages and published widely across the world. Today I've brought you the one from New York from 1920, but here you can see a version in Spanish and a version in French, and they proliferated everywhere. So we'll move on now.
Let's move on now to our own shores of the United States and how anti-Semitism infiltrated our shores.
It actually comes largely in print to our shores through a Greek immigrant called Titi Timaeus. And with him he brings these new ideas that are in the air in Europe, the ideas that the Jews are a race, the ideas promulgated by the protocols that the Jews want to dominate the world, and he brings all those ideas to America, and he publishes several books. The first of which he completely plagiarizes from a French anti-Semite called Edouard Drummond, and then the second of which is his own wonderful invention, which is called The Jew Comes to America. We have in the Price Library, I've brought it here, we have a reprint from the mid-century, but this was originally printed in the late 19th century. And he founded America's first anti-Semitic press called Minerva Publishing. And that starts to disseminate these ideas in America. Oh, and sorry, it's required reading for the Ku Klux Klan.
Okay, so now we're firmly in the 20th century, and this is a time, and the texts we're going to see here moving forward were printed when your parents, your grandparents, you were alive. So just to give you some context of what's in Rebecca's collection and what we'll learn about now, these were printed while your parents and grandparents were making a living and raising a family and living full lives.
Yeah, so it begins with Henry Ford, the motor car magnate, and I'm sure most of you are aware that Henry Ford was a major anti-Semite. But the kids who come to see my collection and that we teach anti-Semitism, they're often very shocked by this. As you may know, Henry Ford established the Dearborn Independent newspaper, a major newspaper in Michigan. And through that, he started to circulate these ideas, the Jewish domination. Here he has his own great take on this. He has Jewish socialists teaming up with Jewish capitalists, and together they're going to globally dominate. And it comes out as a series of articles through the Dearborn Independent, and then he gathers those articles up and he publishes a book called The International Jew. And I brought the edition that we have from the 1920s. But similarly, like these other works, it doesn't stop with being published in the 1920s. It's published multiple times. I think we have something like 700,000 editions. It's reprinted in Germany in the 1920s and 30s. You can see there, Der International Jude, reprinted by someone called Theodor Fritsch. Theodor Fritsch becomes a major anti-Semitic publisher in Germany. Ford really influences Hitler's ideas, and in fact, Hitler gives him a special Medal of Honor, and so you can see it really didn't just stop here in America with Henry Ford.
Okay.
So as we go over to Germany, we see the rise of the anti-Semitic press there through Theodor Fritsch, who establishes the Hammer Verlag press, who's starting to distribute many anti-Semitic works. This one you can see is called The Jewish Question. Here it's not a question of Jewish civic rights. Here it's a question of how do we solve the problem of the Jews. And again, these are printed widely, and these books incorporate all of those older texts that I told you about. It's full of quotations from Eisenmenger. It's full of quotations from Martin Luther. So you can see how the influence went, how Martin Luther was influenced, how Eisenmenger was influenced by Martin Luther, how they influenced Nazi propaganda, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Go ahead, the next slide. And what you're seeing on screen, Rebecca has brought a sample from the library's incredible, how many pieces do you have total in your collection?
I'm ashamed to say we have 300 pieces of these beautiful pieces of literature. Yeah.
Wow. And how many pieces in total in the Judaica? It's got to be over 200,000, right?
We're about 150,000.
Okay, like 200, almost 1,000. We're almost there. So, okay. We need context.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
So the image that you're seeing gets repeated often. You'll see it throughout anti-Jewish propaganda, the idea that the Jew is the octopus or the spider with the long tentacles. Here you've got the octopus hugging the world, or squeezing the world, rather. And this is the cover of a book by Arno Schiggendans, who talks about social parasitism in the life of the nations. With the outbreak of cholera in the early 20th century, scientists quickly caught up in order to try and solve the problem of cholera by understanding more about bacteria and parasites, and those bad actors who really seized upon this and started to accuse Jews of being parasites on the human body. So they take the terminology of biology that's already in the air. They also accuse the Jews of spreading the cholera. And now what you're getting is a very dangerous idea in Germany, because now if the Jew is not human, but a parasite, an insect, this is something that you can easily wipe out. And in fact, you probably have to. It's imperative.
Okay, so when we get to the era of the Nazis, I think of Hitler, Himmler, Goebbels, etc., but there's another name we need to know, and that is Dr. Johann von Lees. And I believe he should be always added to this lineup, so please enlighten us.
Yeah. So Johann von Lees was a major propagandist in the Third Reich. He served under Goebbels. He's important because he makes an important connection between Nazi ideology and what will become Middle Eastern anti-Semitic ideology. Johann von Lees, his first publication is the one you see here, Juden sehen dich an, and I have it here to show you. Jews are looking at you. And the idea was to inform Germans how to recognize Jews visually. And so it's full of sort of anti-Semitic text, again, quoting all these other texts, but with photographs of famous Jews across the world so that you can recognize the Jewish type and protect yourself. Interestingly, he includes a photograph of Charlie Chaplin. And allegedly, when Charlie Chaplin learnt of this, he was so incensed that this led him to create the film The Great Dictator. The other image that you can see, again, kind of spider-like hands around the globe, that's another von Lees publication. I have it here to show you how the Jew gets the money. And again, this one is really focused on the evils of the Rothschilds. And what's really important here as well is not only did he disseminate these texts and they were highly influential on the German population, but after the war he escaped Nazi Germany, went over to Egypt, converted to Islam, became known as Omar Amin, and became Egypt's chief propagandist. So now you can see how these ideas spread.
So, like Rebecca said, you can start to trace and connect the dots, and I'm sure you're doing this with tropes and events that we see today. So I'd like you to expand on the 1960s, the Cold War, very briefly, and the role that USSR at the time, how they flamed these fans of hatred, and can these be traced to the university protests? Is that fair?
Absolutely fair, and we'll get to that in a few slides down. And we'll start with this one because this is where it starts. Absolutely right.
Thank you.
So as I said, you know, Nazi propaganda is just through the Second World War is spreading across, but it starts earlier. What about Jews in Muslim countries? Well, if we look at the figure of Muhammad, we see something a little bit akin to what happened with Luther. Muhammad is friendly with Jews, he takes on board Jewish ideas, but again, once Jews reject Islam and don't convert en masse, there's tension there. So what you'll see in the Quran are also anti-Jewish ideas in the Quran, but at the same time, in perhaps a similar way to Augustine's doctrine of witness, what you get in Islam is the institution of the dhimmi. And so Christians or Jews are a kind of minority, lesser people under Islam, but they're a protected people. So they're not to be destroyed, they're to be protected. And why? Because Jews are described under Islam as the people of the book. So while ever Jews and Christians are the guardians of these great works that are also incorporated into Islam, then they are protected. So you don't quite get in the Islamic world the same thing that's happening in Christendom, although what you get is anti-Jewish riots, Jewish killings, pockets of them, and it depends on the caliph, it depends on the ruler at the time, and it was very sort of up and down, so you get pockets of anti-Jewish violence. It's not quite akin to what's happening in Europe, and certainly you won't go to a mosque and see a Judenschau outside a mosque, so it's different.
We have people who live here in Jacksonville who had to escape Egypt because of this form of anti-Semitism.
Right. So even by the 19th century, you are getting the blood libel coming into the Middle East. There's a famous blood libel in Damascus in the 1890s. But really, the European anti-Semitism starts to spread very strongly in the 1940s. And here you actually have, I'm showing you something that's produced by the local population. It's called Jewish Atrocities in the Holy Land, and it's accusing Jews of spreading cholera. And Jews, again, the swap between Jews and Zionists is interchangeable, and they just want to take over the whole Middle East. We have a question. Shall I take it or?
Sure.
At the same time, you had the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem
Right.
being personal friends with Gribble.
Absolutely, yes.
And Green Dempsey's nephew, no other than Yasser Arafat.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we'll save the rest of the questions for the end of the program.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no, you're absolutely right.
Yes.
That's correct. You do have
Great
that
connection.
influence there. And so you have the connections, you have the bad actors on the ground, and that makes it easy to bring in these sorts of texts and sort of ideas, to integrate them easily into society. And it's easy to whip up a crowd with some of these ideas. And so here you can see how already by the 1960s, you're getting translations of the protocols in Arabic, in Pakistan, in Syria, across the board, and even through to today. I believe a protocols was discovered in Gaza, certainly one of the main anti-Semitic texts. But like you said, in the Cold War era, in the post-war era, anti-Semitism, those who hate Jews are trying to sort of disassociate themselves with anti-Semitism because it's now associated with the Holocaust. So they've got to find different ways of being anti-Jewish, and largely on the far right what you see is the rise of Holocaust denial, because of course if you can deny it, then you can continue to spread the hate. And here are some, I mean, our collection has a lot of these far right publications in them, even through to thick leaflets that were distributed in recent times. So Jews are behind communism, Jews are threatening the world, they're the capitalists, they're the socialists. It's every kind of argument that can be thrown that way, and really the recycling of Nazi propaganda. What we don't hear so much about is the anti-Semitism on the far left. And this really is propagated and instigated by the Soviet Union, particularly after the 1967 war. And then they start to publish hundreds and thousands of anti-Zionist texts. They are translated in multiple languages, and they come over here to America, and they're readily accepted into academia. And what is the trick? The trick is, well, we're not against Jews, we're just against Zionism, we're just against the evils of the state of Israel. But that's not the case, because when you read the literature, they are repeating all the same tropes, all of the same stereotypes. And you can even see it in the imagery that accompanies some of these texts: the spider, the octopus, the giant Jewish capitalist, and then the very nasty idea that Zionists collaborated with the Nazis. And there you can see it there as an image of two babies drinking from the same bottle, the Nazis and the Zionists. And so we are here at last.
So all roads lead to the internet, it seems. You've traced this historical evolution against hatred against Jewish people, and I'm sure, like I said, we're connecting the dots, we're having aha moments. So before we wrap this talk, I know that we've discussed this word anti-Semitic and the term Jew hatred, and we both find them highly problematic. So if you could elaborate on that in your brilliant way.
I think we're at a point where we're talking about anti-Semitism a lot. It's in the news. We've got podcasts we listen to, I know I do, with wonderful Jewish leaders talking about it and how to solve it. And we use this term anti-Semitism over and over again, and yet nobody really knows what it means, right? And it's easy for an anti-Semite to say, I'm not anti-Semitic, and to push against it because it's not a clearly defined word. And as you've seen, it was the anti-Semites themselves who came up with this idea. And so, there are alternatives, anti-Jewish hatred, but that's too wordy. I was listening to a podcast recently by Dan Sinor, who interviewed what's his name? Sorry.
Not Brett.
It's Judea Pearl, the father of Daniel Pearl, who was murdered, who would like to instigate the word Zionophobia. Again, it's a good idea. It's not necessarily catchy, and again, easy to say. Well, I don't like Israel, but I like Jews. It doesn't really capture it. And so there are many problematics. All I want to raise here is I don't have a solution, but there are many problematics around the words that we use to describe this phenomenon, which, as you can see, is a shapeshifter. It evolves. It adapts to the various conditions. We all know what anti-Semitism is. When we see it, when it's subtle, we know what it is. We can immediately, our anti-Semitism radar goes off, right? But not everybody else does. And I'm not sure that we're doing ourselves a favor with the terminology. So I just put that out there. But just to say that we need to keep talking about it. We need to be informed. Why? Because it's proliferating in this age. The image that you see here is of an open and free database called the Internet Archive. When I first started looking after this stuff and collecting some of it, I was very careful about the way I managed it. I only want it to be used for serious scholarship. It is to inform about the evils of anti-Semitism. It is not for people to read for pleasure. Now you can just go and download it freely from the internet, because this character here, called Know Your Enemy, has uploaded 120 of these vile works that anyone can get to. So it's freely available. And then there's the problem of social media. These are two images that I took from X just after October 7th. See again the massive spider, the Zionist venom. See there the hooked-nosed Jew. It's the stupid. These are across social media. It's immediate. It's really rather unstoppable. It's very frightening. So that's where we are. I apologize for such a distressing subject.
You know, every time we give this talk, we get the same question. It's just asked in many different ways, but the essence of it is this: what can we do to stop it? Mm-hmm. And everyone has an opinion on what to do about our Jewish identity, anti-Semitism, and our very existence in this world. Recently, Bret Stephens of Sapir and the New York Times had a lot to say about this 2 weeks ago at the State of World Jewry talk that he gave at the 92nd Street Y. If you haven't seen it, it's free. It's on YouTube. A lot of you are shaking your heads. He had some great ideas. For Rebecca and me, it's this talk. This is something that we can do. But also, wait, there's more. Because a few years ago, I reached out to Rebecca with a proposal, or should I say another fine mess to get her into, that could combine storytelling and the incredible resources that she has at the library. And I want to give you the first look. This is the first time we'll be screening this. This is a first look at educational collaboration between Rebecca and I to do something. This is what we can do to feel good about ourselves and to feel good about the future. And of course, I'm doing a lot of other projects with Searching for Identity. Rebecca's doing this night and day along with everything else that she stewards in the collection. And if you want to go visit the museum, please see Eunice Sisser, and we'll put together some type of program if you want to go before the 29th. So if you could go ahead, Eddie, and we'll see what Hope Tech works, and take a look at this. It's a 3-minute video.
This was published by one of Hitler's propagandists and publishers called Julian Streicher. So the book was actually created by a young woman living in Nazi Germany. Her name was Vera Bauer, and she was a young art teacher. The title is, in English, Never Trust a Fox in the Field or a Jew by His Word. So the whole poem talks about the Jews and their sort of nefarious influence upon Germans, talks about how to identify them, and their various disturbing habits, why Germany is suffering under the influence of the Jews, and eventually sort of a recommendation that the Jews should leave Germany. It was something that was read by many German school children during the Nazi period. It's very attractive, and its attractiveness is what appealed to the reader. It teaches us to be aware of what we're looking at, that not all that glitters is gold, and that there could be poison within. This piece was used in the Nuremberg trials as evidence of Nazi propaganda, and how Nazi propaganda led to the Holocaust and the atrocities that occurred. It is really important to keep these pieces, as disturbing as they are, because we can understand more about the mindset of the people who created them, the types of stereotypes and lies that they were disseminating. it's a sort of a lesson from history. We have other items like this in the collection. It's part of what we term our Antisemitica collection. And we're one of the few institutions in the country that have a collection like this. We can use them to introduce students to primary sources, teach them how to approach archives and manuscripts that captures Jewish history across its breadth and depth. These materials also represent a way of keeping those memories alive. As the students interact with them, they are retaining something of the memory of the person whose life is captured in these boxes and passing that along themselves to future generations.
So we are collaborating on an educational project that will highlight many of the items that Rebecca presented today. In fact, that book is here today for you to take a look at. This is one of the many projects that Searching for Identity is doing, because that's what we can do. And I would say every one of you in this room has the ability to do something, to speak out, to do whatever it is to ensure these stories are remembered and to ensure never again. So I want to thank you, Rebecca. I want to wrap it up because I don't want to interfere with the religious school who's breaking soon. But if you have any questions for Rebecca, she'll be available. Please, if you want to leave your drinks on the table, please come and take a look at the items that she has brought. Thank you so much.